There's this idea out there that to heal from trauma, you need to feel your feelings. And some people will encourage you to feel your feelings and explore your feelings and trust your feelings. But when you have PTSD from childhood, the problem isn't always that you don't feel what you're supposed to feel. More of the time, I think the problem is that you do feel your feelings too much. They get overloaded. And I can show you how to reel that back into a healthy balance. It's called emotional dysregulation, and in my opinion, it can do even more damage than being out of touch with your feelings. Your life can get dominated by your emotions. Are you familiar with that feeling? Your relationships get dominated by your emotions. Your career gets dominated by your emotions. And being so emotional, like having feelings that are inappropriately intense by most people's standards, or when you get emotional at inappropriate times, that's not something where feeling your feelings is the solution. In my view, emotional dysregulation really is kind of like a wrecking ball, or like a tornado that spins around and wrecks everything in its path. Where's it going to go? You don't know. It just sort of comes up out of nowhere and boom, starts destroying things. Sometimes emotional dysregulation goes in the opposite direction, and it just sort of like it's like a light bulb, you know, where all of a sudden it glows really brightly and then goes out. It's dark, there's nothing, you're not feeling anything. Blazing light, nothing. With complex PTSD, what is often a symptom of emotional dysregulation is that flatness after a big outburst. So you might be familiar with some of those patterns. Feelings go out of control. They're coming out in bursts. They're out of proportion to what's going on, or at an inappropriate time, like crying at work or having an angry outburst at your internet provider when you're on a customer service call. And it also refers to going flat emotionally. So it's dysregulated. It's just like not kind of in the middle area that would be appropriate or normal or comfortable for human communication. So big spikes, nothing. But either way, when your feelings are dysregulated, you might say and do things that only overwhelm you further, and then that actually create new traumas that make your situation even harder than it was. So it can be a vicious circle. So one example could be having an argument with your partner. So let's say something makes you angry, and they forgot you had friends coming to dinner and you cooked, but your partner arrived an hour late. You didn't know where they were. They never called. And the guests arrived and you didn't have an answer for them. And you called your partner 3 or 4 times, and you texted and you called, and you were getting more and more frantic. You're in the other room to try to hide how angry you are. And the friends are there. And you're trying to act normal and like everything's fine and it's no big deal that your partner's not there. And then an hour into the dinner, your partner walks in. They totally forgot. And they see everyone and they remember, oh my gosh, they're so sorry. And they're embarrassed. And the guests are like, it's fine, it's fine. And you're like, where were you? And you're trying to act normal. You're trying to keep your emotions kind of in the bandwidth of not totally awful for the guests, but you can't. And so they're ready to sit down now and enjoy the company. But for you, it's too late. That's emotional dysregulation at work. Because old feelings of being ignored and abandoned are just exploding up out of the past. It is an offense that your partner forgot. That's not cool. But the intensity that's coming out of you has more to do with the past. You know it because it's like filling up your chest. It's in your gut. It's in your head. You might start getting a headache. And the guests are there. So don't you hate that? Getting emotionally dysregulated in front of company. It's your reaction to the situation that's now ruining the evening. Has this happened to you? In the moment, it feels like these huge emotions are the only feelings a person could have. And now, later, you're going to have the insight that your reaction was actually too much, that you became the problem person of the evening. But when it's happening, it just feels real. It feels necessary to be that angry, right? It's moments like this when maybe you've said things you didn't mean, because now you're not just dealing with disappointment and hurt, but you're believing that nothing's any good. Because you know what's driving you at that point? Shame. Just the old shame of like, that old well of anger and emotion came up and kind of blasted out. There's like this point where, it's feeling really real and you get so mad and then it blasts out of you. And that often sort of triggers you to start recovering and coming back to reality from like, wait, it's not really that bad. So then the shame comes in and you feel worse. Then you might feel a need to check out. You go flat. You can't apologize, everything. Well, this is how friendships fall apart. This kind of thing is how it falls apart. And it's not your fault you got this way. this is a really common and normal response to having grown up with trauma. But of course, we all want to work on it and learn to handle it even better. Even if your partner is used to this kind of behavior and they stick around, this kind of conflict that doesn't feel realistic, that feels overblown, it'll gradually drain away love and trust and close off connection that otherwise would be getting deeper and getting sweeter over time. So that's another way relationships get destroyed. So this is what I mean when I sort of give the side eye to the idea that what we all need is just to feel our feelings, or you just need to grieve, or you just need to get in touch with your anger. Like, that's not always the best advice for everybody. It's not always what's needed. For some people with CPTSD, what's needed is to self-regulate and get more control over emotions, and to have some tools in your tool belt to know how to do that on the spot, even before you really know what's going on with you, even before you've been able to process or talk through what happened. Just when you realize, like, uh-oh, I'm going over the top, how do you pull yourself back? Because that's how you can make a positive change for the better. Once you can manage that, you start having a huge amount of space where you can talk things out. You can ask questions. You can express yourself and say, you were late for dinner. We had company. I was so embarrassed. You can say that, but you can say that in proportion to, what the problem really is. All right? So I'll show you how to do that. You'll find that if you can control emotions before they get intense, so starting early, you may have this little window of opportunity to do that. You can avoid a lot of problems that come from overreactions and overwhelm, and it's easier to get back to a calm and regulated state then. So I have a friend who visualizes emotional dysregulation as an airplane taking off. You may have heard me talk about that. And regulating her emotions is what she calls keeping the airplane on the ground. And I love that. That is what it feels like, because, yeah. And so you can think of that too. How are you going to keep your airplane on the ground? Once it takes off, it's just a great big deal. So how are you going to do that? You can do it. You can stay regulated even when you're upset if you understand what's happening and you practice, practice, practice. So when you go into a strong emotional reaction, one is notice it's happening. Are you flooding with emotion? Are you feeling adrenaline? Are you panicking? Are you starting to cry? So say to yourself, I'm having an emotional reaction. Because it's just true. You can just say that to yourself. Just ground yourself in reality with that. I'm having an emotional reaction. So another thing you can do is slow down the interaction. Just get it way slowed down. A lot of us are very sensitive to hurrying, and yet once we start panicking, we start rushing. So it sort of compounds itself. So you can just back up, take big pauses between what is said. Take your time to answer, take your time to say things, consider your words, prepare to see things in a new way. Now, a lot of the time, simply slowing things down can reduce the overwhelm. That's all that's needed. Less overwhelm means you can recover your perspective right there and then and experience a little calming effect inside. If you're about to cry and you don't want to cry because you're at work or you're giving a speech or you don't want to be vulnerable in a particular situation, here's a great trick. Imagine that on your stomach, like right below your belly button, that you have a knob, all right? And the knob goes all the way up to 10 or 11 if you like Spinal Tap. If you have emotional dysregulation, it definitely goes to at least 11, all right? So now imagine that the tears are coming because you accidentally left the knob at about 8. So now, just in your mind, dial your belly knob just down to 2. Just bring it down to 2. And sometimes that's all that's needed to just stop the tears, control the tears and the sadness. It is like somebody left a gate open or something and the cows are running out. So you just shut the gate or bring it down to 2. You're not cutting off your emotions 100%, but just controlling the opening there. All right, if it's anger that's happening, use what used to be called restraint of pen and tongue. That's a really nice phrase. I use it all the time. It's so helpful to me. And it means don't say anything or write anything, including emails, texts, letters. Don't do it when you're angry. What happens is this venting will escalate your emotional overwhelm, and your thinking gets distorted, and you might say things you don't actually believe and that you'll regret. And of course, if you've ever had a conflict over text, it never goes well. There's no way to communicate the tenderness or the caring or the listening. It just sounds like somebody's snapping, no matter how you handle it. So don't do that. When you're angry, don't write. Instead, because it's important to express yourself, promise yourself that you'll express yourself just a little later when you're calm. You can find a gentle, polite way to postpone any more conversation. You can just say, I really want to have this conversation. It's important to me. I definitely don't want to, get all intense on you. Could I just have 15 minutes so I can, just bring my emotions together? You don't even have to say that if you're at work. You can just say, you know what, I have this other call. I need to go do that. Can I come back and have this conversation with you in 15 minutes? So whether you choose to tell anybody that you're taking time out to emotionally re-regulate or not, people will generally accept that you can continue the conversation later. And whether they realize what was about to happen or not, it's good for everybody for you to show up kind of regulated for all your conversations. It's good for you, it's good for them. If it feels urgent for you to express yourself, that is often a cue that you need to take double time pausing and getting re-regulated. The sense of urgency is not always reliable with CPTSD. It's basically your old emergency response kicking in over stuff that's just about communication or saying how you feel. So when it really is an emergency, if you need to pull somebody out of a rushing river, or you're in an abusive situation and you need to get out the door, of course urgency is appropriate. But if it's just about communicating something or trying to talk something through, if you feel urgency, it's very likely going to only benefit if you pause for 30 minutes or an hour or tomorrow. There's very little that has to be solved in any given day that's important. So if you can come back regulated in more time, that's really good. Don't underestimate the damage you can do when you try to solve problems when you're dysregulated. It's kind of like driving drunk, okay? All right, another thing you can do some emergency writing. And I'm talking about the daily practice way of writing that I teach. I have a free course. I always link it on the free tools page of my website. The free tools page of my website is always linked down in the description section below. But it's called the daily practice, and I teach a specific technique where you can get your fearful and resentful thoughts on paper, kind of ask for them to be removed, rest your mind. Give it a try. So many of us have experienced life-changing healing from being able to put our emotions on paper before just kind of throwing them at another person. It often feels, especially if you were neglected as a kid, that what you really, really need is to tell somebody how much they hurt you. Because there's this fantasy that if you tell them, then they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll come in and I'll care for you and I'll help you feel better. But in adult life, that's usually not how people respond when we come at them in anger. They don't respond like trying to help us. And if they do, it's probably not coming from a healthy place. But also, it's not realistic that other people can, even if they want to, that they can re-regulate your nervous system. It is an inside job. So we take those feelings to the paper and have a process for relieving them before having the communication. We do need communication, but when it's packed up with all your unmet childhood needs, it becomes something quite frightening and overwhelming to other people. They're either going to run or they're going to pretend, but it's going to be a disappointment and it's going to hurt your relationship. So paper, that's a suggestion there. What I love about paper, you can do this just about anywhere. In the bathroom, you can do it in the dark of a movie theater, you can do it in the car when you're a passenger, not driving obviously. You can do it in bed in the middle of the night. You can do it at your desk while you're pretending to work. And employers, I'm an employer too. But here's the thing, I'm not saying that you should just fake work and steal time from your employer like that, but sometimes the most efficient way to get productive in your day is to take the overwhelming emotions and just get them out on paper so that you can return your focus back to the task at hand. That's a good thing to do. It's definitely better than having an emotional meltdown too. All right, another thing you can do is get some hard exercise to kind of rinse all those stress chemicals out of your body. You can run up and down a flight of stairs a couple times if you are physically able to do that. If you can walk, you can take a brisk walk. Whatever you physically can do to get your heart rate up, maybe just break a little bit of a sweat. It just is so powerful to turn around the stress chemicals that are active when you're in emotional dysregulation. And sometimes you can come at emotional dysregulation through reason. Sometimes you have to come at it through physical action. There are a number of ways that you can approach your healing. So I'm giving you a list of them so you can find your favorites. All right, here's one. This is another physical one. You can wash your hands, or in a big pinch, you can take a shower. Wash your hands in cold water, splash it on your face. Everybody does that, right? Sometimes. Or wash your hands in nice, warm, soapy water that feels nice, and just take a minute to feel the water on your hands and the soap and the clean hands and feel how nice that is. You're using these tactile experiences to just sort of come back from this sort of flight away from what's actually happening for your senses right here in the room for you right now. This is called being in your body. And I don't actually believe that people leave their bodies, but that's a metaphor for what happens when our nervous system is starting to shut down, like quadrants of your brain are just going dim, and you're not able to process sensory input from where you are. And that's when you're often vulnerable to outbursts or saying things you don't mean. You want to be in touch with all of your feelings. You want to be in touch with cues. You want to be able to detect danger. Like if you're going up and shouting at somebody on the street, what if they're dangerous? What if they could physically harm you? You need to be tuned in, right? And so that's why physical regulation, neurological regulation goes hand in hand with emotional regulation. So we're learning to master re-regulation of both. It all comes down together, and you begin to be centered in a calm awareness. And you have nice ears to hear what's going on. You have eyes. You have a heart to feel what's going on. And imagine, like, if you could do that, that would change a lot, right? So emotional dysregulation feels to me, and I think a lot of people, a little bit like a trance, like you're hypnotized. You're a little bit out of touch with some things. You're deeply in touch with something else, a feeling. And what you need to develop is to have part of you that can sort of stand outside that situation and go, I see that I'm going into a trance-like dysregulation state. And that part of you that can see it's going on can kind of take you gently by the shoulders and say, hey, come on, Anna. Come on out. Let's get out of this dysregulated state. Let's use some tools. Once you have that part of you that can sort of pull you back a little bit when you notice it's happening, you've just gotten on the path to serious change. That's how you do it. Self-awareness, just enough to pull back. Before you know what to do, before you've solved all your problems, you're just like, okay, this thing is happening. I know it doesn't go well when I, say things and try to solve problems like this. Let me take a beat. All right. If you like, you can talk with somebody who is trustworthy, they understand you, and who's not in that moment in a conflict with you. Very important. Someone else. Sometimes it helps to get an outside perspective. But I don't recommend trying to tell a long story. I don't recommend trying to vent, going into yet another hypnotic trance, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then, have you done that? I've done it. That's bad. That just takes me worse into emotional dysregulation. So the discussion, it doesn't usually work that well when you're already upset. But obviously, sometimes this can't be avoided, and somebody will try to help you and assist you to kind of emotionally calm it. The irony is that one of the hardest things for a person in emotional dysregulation to hear is, can you calm down? Ma'am, please calm down. It's like, woo, it goes off again. So sometimes it's going to be you by yourself. So one way to check in with yourself when you're having one of those conversations is to ask yourself, is having this conversation making you more dysregulated? Are you feeling more upset? Are you maybe talking faster and faster, louder and louder? Are you talking on top of people? These are signs that you're actually going into dysregulation. So if you can have that part of you stand outside and go, oops, I'm getting more dysregulated. You just find a polite way to say, okay, well, thanks for your help. Now get yourself to a private space with your pen and pencil or your tools, your physical tools, to start bringing yourself back before you begin talking again. Talking is sometimes the gateway drug to more dysregulation, just saying. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. We need to learn the difference, because when we're dysregulated, the person we're getting all dysregulated on will often also dysregulate, and two dysregulated people will often escalate quite badly. You've probably been there. Everything that needs to be said can and should be said, but not necessarily in that moment. If you possibly can, wait until you're regulated, calm, more lucid, able to feel the range of feelings you have about someone, and not just the angry part, not frantically trying to get them to understand something. These steps, by the way, don't just help you regulate emotionally, but they help you re-regulate your brain and in your body, your heart rate, your breathing, your thinking, your coordination of your feet and hands, your ability to focus. So I have a quiz you can take if you want to check some of the symptoms of dysregulation. If you're hearing this and you're like, wait, that happens to me, I got a list of them, and you can check them off on this list. That is in my free tools page too that I mentioned on my website, free tools. The link to the free tools page is down below in the description section. When you're re-regulating your emotions and the intense thoughts keep just fluttering in, just keep reminding yourself to hold the thought and instead focus on next steps, positive actions, positive words. This isn't positive thinking, it's not toxic positivity. This is just redirecting your thoughts when they're sort of going whack to a clearer mental space, because that's part of you too. You have clarity in there. You have a place in there that has less emotional charge, where you can anchor yourself. You can remind yourself that's your home. That's where you go when things get crazy, is into this home inside. You're not suppressing your feelings. You're just postponing expressing your feelings until you're a little more regulated. And contrary to popular belief, by the way, you don't have to talk things out to get regulated. Talking about your feelings, it's important, but there's a time and a place, and sometimes that best time and place is later, when it will be helpful and constructive, and when it will help you have and keep and strengthen relationships with people you love, people you treasure, even though it doesn't feel like that when you're emotionally dysregulated. So when this happens, just keep reminding yourself by silently telling yourself, I'm feeling dysregulated. And then use your tools. Stop venting. Remind yourself that you don't need to express yourself and clear the air right then. Your words will be there. Your feelings will be there waiting for you when you're calmer. You will have access to yourself. You'll be no longer dysregulated. And then when you express yourself, you can do it elegantly and with fairness and love. It'll feel great to keep your relationship gentle like this and to get past the shame of overreactions. And then you can enjoy the way that your connections with other people, rather than getting ruined, begin to get nicer, deeper, stronger over time. If you want to learn more about dysregulation, and in particular the whole nervous system kind and what that feels like, I've got this video lined up for you right here, and I will see you very soon.
Hi, I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy. Now, everybody knows that crappy experiences in our childhood can end up causing a whole slew of symptoms in our adult life. Stuff like depression, anxiety, relationship problems, health problems, difficulties with learning and paying attention and memory. One name for these symptoms is childhood PTSD. And if you think you have it, you've probably tried all kinds of treatments, from therapy and books and counseling and support groups and even medication. But if you're like most people I talk to, these normal people solutions are only kind of effective. They work for a while, so long as you're going to the class or until the insurance runs out. But after that, you're kind of on your own, worried, scared. You're going to slip back into all the symptoms of PTSD. That's what used to happen to me. I was trying to get my life together, and I was willing to follow all that good, smart advice from the people in my life. But it wasn't helping me. I would go to therapy 3 times a week, and when I came out, I would feel worse than when the hour started. I was worried about how I was going to get even the 2 or 3 days to the next appointment. But now I know that those solutions have this one big piece missing for people with childhood PTSD. There are things that you can do right now that totally work, but you have to understand what the real underlying problem is. Until recently, the effects on us as adults were thought to be almost entirely psychological. They thought we had developed negative self-esteem, negative beliefs about ourselves, maybe thought that we deserved to be in bad relationships, that kind of thing. Now, this may be partially true in some people, but it's not the whole story, not at all. So sure, childhood trauma can cause psychological problems, but the really important thing for us is that it can cause brain changes. So the effects are not just psychological, but neurological. And neurological problems can manifest in every part of our lives. It can result in physical health problems like diabetes and heart disease, but it can also manifest as emotional problems like depression or uncontrollable anger. Or it can manifest in behaviors that in theory we can control. Stuff like drug and alcohol abuse, risky sex, getting into abusive relationships, or the opposite, avoiding everyone. So these things start as neurological changes and then become psychological issues that then become self-destructive behaviors. So you can talk to a therapist about the behaviors or about the psychological issues, but if your brain is just sending compromised signals to other parts of your brain or to your organs, you have a problem that's really hard to talk your way out of. And that's not really how we were trained to think about it, right? You're supposed to talk about your problems, but when you have PTSD, talking about it can sometimes make it worse than if you weren't to talk about it. So if you're relating to this so far, then you're probably all too familiar with that feeling that you're kind of going down this path in life and you're getting really freaked out and you don't know how you got there and you don't know how you can dig your way out. So here's the missing piece. The underlying problem in childhood PTSD is dysregulation. First, we get dysregulated in the brain. Now you probably know the feeling really well. Maybe your emotions go up through the roof and then they go really flat. And you say things you don't mean, or you get very spaced out, and you do things like getting lost driving through your own neighborhood, or you walk into a room and you don't know why you came in there, or you lose your train of thought in the middle of trying to speak a sentence, or you get clumsy and you trip and you drop things. These are the telltale signs that your normally well-regulated brain has gone dysregulated. It's a little bit out of whack. If they did an MRI on you, they might see whole sections that have gone dark. There's no activity there. Or they'd see areas that are unusually lit up and not communicating well with the other parts of the brain that they're supposed to communicate smoothly with. After a while, our brains will gradually come back to a regulated state, but when you're suffering with childhood PTSD, you're spending way too much time in that dysregulated state, and it's really limiting. Dysregulated people can't think straight. They can't make good decisions. Their judgment is wrong. Research has shown that people who had a really rough childhood can sometimes have a lot of difficulty being aware when danger is at hand or a loss is about to happen, and they can't adjust their behavior accordingly. Do you ever feel like you just keep walking into the same problem over and over again and you didn't see it coming? It's really easy to spot in other people, but when you have childhood PTSD, it's sort of like you wake up and you go, how did I get here again? Now, psychological problems respond to talking and reason, but neurological problems have to be addressed a little differently. When I learned how to re-regulate my brain whenever I needed to, then I could start to rehabilitate every part of my life that had been damaged before. I started to feel the best parts of myself coming back online: my intelligence, my compassion, my ability to connect with people and to form lovely, nourishing, safe relationships. I could follow through on plans I made. I could be responsible. I could be healthy. I could be safe. I could be happy. If dysregulation is the underlying problem, then a purely psychological approach is only going to be able to get us a little temporary relief, which is not entirely a bad thing, but it's not going to get us a permanent change out of the suckiness of having PTSD. For lasting change, we need to get our brains working again, to re-regulate them. And with that done, then we can begin to re-regulate our emotions, taking them back from extremes of numbness and hyperintensity back to center. And from there, we can begin to re-regulate our decisions and our behaviors and take them back from the extremes that we're prone to with childhood PTSD of too much and too little. That's what the Crappy Childhood Fairy blog and these videos are all about. It's about doing things that work for treating childhood PTSD. A crappy childhood does not have to define you for the rest of your life. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be sharing real strategies that you can use to actually make changes and recover and get your life back.
Fucker. God dang. They really don't like me. Motherfucker! Gotcha! Damn, what the fuck was that? How much did he pay for that frickin' gun? Fucking, okay. You know what? Ah, you motherfucker! Alright, hold up, come on, lady. This one.
Now, magical thinking is usually considered a bad thing, but getting PTSD during childhood And going into magical thinking and
Motherfucker,
getting
that son
really
of a-
good at it may just have saved you from having your spirit destroyed. And I want to tell you why I say that. So when bad things were happening and a parent hurt you or abandoned you or told you you were worthless, your little child's mind, you know, if you had stayed present and lucid in those moments, you would have had to absorb that blow. You would have had to take it in, and it's so unthinkably painful that it could have shattered you emotionally and psychologically. And I mean, what parent even says these kind of things? I've heard them do it. It happens. But who would abandon a kid? Who would physically hurt them? So as a kid, you couldn't take that in. Your mind did something incredibly brilliant and separated you and shut down the feelings and hardened that little tender part of you that could perceive reality, that was tuned into the nuance of what everything means and where people are coming from. And it put those parts of you in a safe place, in quasi-unconsciousness. And that's how you dealt with experiences that could otherwise have hurt you even more. So, checking out. Thank goodness that we were able to do that so that there's an intact little spirit in there now, and we have the good fortune to bring this part of ourselves back into the world. It's not always obvious how to do that, and when we make an effort, it can be clunky and inconsistent. And then we keep slipping back sometimes into that checked out mode, and when we do that as adults, people can hurt us. And we get confused instead of angry, and we cling instead of running away. But we can keep trying to keep coming back up out of ourselves and follow that road to healing. That is what it's like. So today I have a letter from a woman I'll call Olivia, and she is right there, like healing but sliding back into that little place that's unfortunately for her right now pretty negative, but she can't totally see it yet. So I'm going to read her letter out loud and then see if I can help her open her eyes and get unstuck and take one good, strong leap forward in her healing. And here's what Olivia says. Dear Fairy, according to your quiz, I score 100% in CPTSD symptoms, as does my mother. I don't know anything about my father. I've never even seen a photo of him. My mom was an abused child. She was beaten, abandoned, and sexually abused. She was a heroin addict when she got pregnant with me in her early 20s, and my father was a party fling. She decided to go ahead with the pregnancy with me. Long story short, she did give up on drugs when she decided to keep me, and I do believe she did the best she could, given what little she had to work with. Nevertheless, she was not present or fully capable of raising children. I have a younger sister, she says. We were extremely neglected to the point of our basic needs not being met, and I have little memory of any physical affection. We also moved often and struggled financially, which created a general lack of stability. She was a single mom, putting herself through school and working, which left very little time for us. When we were 5 and 7, my sister and I were up before her and riding the city bus to school alone without anyone to prepare breakfast or pack a lunch. We often stole candy from 7-Eleven to feed ourselves. I could go on with the many layers of dysfunction in our family, but I think you probably have a sense that it simply was not healthy or safe for a child. All right, I got the picture. It's coming together now. So that's some background. And Olivia says, now I'm in my 40s, barely scraping by financially, and have yet to experience a true, healthy, stable, and loving relationship. I live with a friend who also happens to be someone I obsessively fell for a few years back when we first knew each other. I became convinced through intense dream and meditation experiences that we were soulmates and mystically bonded. I had no idea I was just one of his many booty calls. He was good-looking, troubled, bad boy archetype, and I was living in a fantasy world, thinking that he must feel it too. I can't deny that there have been some very bizarre synchronicities, but this person flat out rejected me to my face, and I kept hanging on to a sliver of hope that one day it would all change. He would see and love me, and we'd live out our fairy tale destiny. Over the past year, we have established a very different platonic dynamic. Though I still feel anxious at times, and feelings do resurface, mainly sadness associated with the feeling of being unwanted and rejection and being on my own. I quit hooking up with him when I set a standard that I would not be sexually involved with anyone who didn't actually choose me, see me, and love me. And needless to say, I've been celibate ever since. I'm renting a room in his house at a very affordable rate
Abstinent.
because he helped me out of a situation where I had nowhere to go. I'm working diligently on building a business, and he's supportive in that. He also understands what it's like not to have family to back you up, and I believe wants to be there for me in that way. We now play as if we're more like siblings who help each other like family. He refers to me as his sister. He also had a really rough upbringing and is focused on healing. I'm well aware of how messy this all probably sounds, but our relationship continues to improve. I feel that he's been a really tough teacher and mirror for me to see where I'm not well, especially in terms of codependency and extreme people-pleasing in his case. My female friend actually told me that it was looking like Stockholm Syndrome, given the way that this guy was treating me. I'm doing all I can to shed light on that and change the behavior. The main reason I bring all of this up is that despite the positive shift in our dynamic, me accepting that he's not the one, I'm circling a lot. I must look like a mean teacher here, but I'm going to go over this again, and I just want to make sure we talk about some of these key phrases you're using. So accepting that he's not the one for me, though when he's particularly sweet, says Olivia, and he's now more than he ever was, these flickers of future faking do resurface until I talk myself out of it. I have an underlying fear that my dynamic with him may be blocking me from meeting someone who would be right for me. He now has a great girlfriend who's helping him heal and grow, which I would think would help clear the space even more. But I'm basically looking for some perspective from someone who understands CPTSD. I'm happy with my living situation, and I care for him deeply. I'm just curious if maybe I'm not catching a blind spot and would love your input. Thank you for taking the time to read this. I'm very grateful. Olivia, I think when you wrote to me, you've seen enough of my videos to probably guess where I'm going to come from on this, okay?
Sure.
I think that you are in some serious magical thinking. And I'm noticing some phrases here that tend to come from New Age types of disciplines and communities. And you may have seen, I have a video, I'll link it at the end of this one, about ways that New Age myths can be used to manipulate people. And I think that while you're kind of being manipulated here, most of all, you're deceiving yourself, all right? Tough love. But let's go through your letter and I'll tell you why I say that. Okay. First, I heard your background. I don't think anybody who was abandoned at that level, whose mom was a heroin addict, who had to get themselves out on the city bus and eat it and steal candy at 7-Eleven when they're 5, that's just, I totally understand. I understand as few others can, actually, what that can do to you and how it can distort your perception of what it means to love somebody or be a friend or be a brother and sister, all right? So you're in your 40s, and you haven't yet had a truly healthy, stable, and loving relationship. And I think that, you had told me a little more that I didn't read here, but you've been working really hard on yourself. You tend to be a hermit. Some people are really, truly introverted, but a lot of people are hermits because it's triggering to be around people. And so I'm going to guess that whatever your personality is like, people are triggering for you, and you crave a safe space where you know who it is, you know who you're living with, and you can feel kind of safe and taken care of. Being in your 40s and not being financially on your feet, it happens to the best of us, right? But I'm hearing here that this could be sort of a setup for you to be extremely vulnerable and dependent on somebody who is feeding off of your energy, your romantic energy, being in that presence. So I'm just going to go through some areas that I circled one by one and not just jump to what it is I'm about here. Let's build up to this. Okay. You became convinced through intense dream and meditation experiences that you were soulmates and mystically bonded. It's called limerence, and that is something really common for people with childhood trauma, especially people who were abandoned. And limerence is this thing that's something like being in love, but what's strange about it is it involves a whole bunch of obsession. You'll find yourself like just trying to read into every little thing that the other person says or does. There's a huge element of fantasy there. And especially if you're kind of involved in spiritual, new age type stuff, there's going to be some validation for this. That, oh yes, your fantasy about this has some reality to it. But with CPTSD, not all fantasies have reality to it. You can have a vision of what you want for your life, but when you keep imagining that somebody is your special somebody, but they have a girlfriend, they don't want to be with you, then it's a toxic drug that, in effect, even though you don't want to be, you're taking a drug to try to numb out what's horrible. And the trouble with limerent relationships is they very, very rarely can evolve into something like neutral and safe. So I'll get to that. All right. So soulmates and mystically bonded. This may really upset a lot of people listening, but I think if you have CPTSD and attachment issues, I would just get rid of the whole idea of soulmates. It's not a helpful concept, and it's a phrase, it's a figure of speech that people use. It also goes along with the idea of twin flames. And if I had $1 for every time people had written to me about how they used to believe in twin flames, which is like where you believe that you're the same soul as somebody, it's just not true. I'm just going to call it. It's not true. It's a form of fantasy, and it can be used to manipulate people. It's a way of convincing people that even though a relationship is just totally awful and you don't get what you want, and maybe you're a side thing or a source of energy or romantic validation for somebody, that it all means something. It's a way that people get hooked in to bad relationships. So that's why I'm just calling it. All right. So then in your letter you said, I can't deny there have been some bizarre synchronicities.
Oh, guys.
Okay. So there's a couple things you say here where I can tell you're not platonic. You're still in it. The magical thinking is there, but you're fighting it. You're sort of like, I'm trying to accept that we're just friends, and I'm living in his house, and he has a girlfriend. But there are these bizarre synchronicities. Later in the letter, you say, I'm trying to accept that he's not the one for me, but when he's particularly sweet, and he is now more than ever, these flickers of future faking do resurface until I talk myself out of it. So I think you mean you future fake yourself. And for anybody watching, future faking is when somebody manipulates another person by saying, it's going to be so great, baby, we're going to get married. And they do this like when you barely know them. And if you're very vulnerable, you go along with it and believe it. And future faking, I'd say that when people say, you know what, I think that we're soulmates, or we had a past life together, that is a form of future faking. It's sort of trying to trick somebody into thinking there's something there, but there's no intention to follow up on it. They may occasionally think they intend to follow up on it, but future faking it's connected to a lot of narcissistic behavior and manipulative behavior, where somebody is just trying to get what they want. So you know that word, but if you were applying it to him, I don't know if he's future faking. I think you might be future faking yourself, is what I'm saying. Okay. So then you you say that there are bizarre synchronicities, but, and here you come back to reality, this person flat out rejected me to my face, and I kept hanging on to a sliver of hope that one day it would all change. He would see and love me, and we'd live out our fairy tale destiny. All right, so when you say fairy tale, I know you're being ironic and you're being silly, but I know what limerence is like, and it is a fairy tale. That is what's going on. It's a pretend story, and it's a fantasy. It's a form of escapism. So, trauma reactions, it's like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And when you go into fantasy, it's a form of flight. You're escaping. Reality is too hard and too painful, and there's these little reminders that something's terribly wrong, and change is going to be required, and change is scary, and so it's just like, whoosh, I'm just going into this fantasy. Because really, this is going to work out. There is no writing on the wall that this is going to work out at all. All right, so I'll just be the mean old fairy who tells you that. This is not going to work out. But right now, you guys kind of have an agreement that you get to stay there and fawn on him. Think that he's really special and great and helping you. There's a lot of language of helping here. You did say it's almost impossible to be yourself around him because you're so nervous. And that is, that's just one more sign, like, that this is not like a good relationship. A good relationship, whether it's platonic or romantic, means you can be yourself with somebody. You're not afraid to be yourself.
With a grenade
But you
in
know
there.
what
That's
happens,
I should've
Olivia? What we do is we stop being ourselves because being ourselves would make it all too painfully obvious that this is like, it's like a cat walking on the piano keys, right? It's just, it's not, something is really discordant, it's not working, there's no harmony here. And so you're cramming this belief system in that somehow it's okay. Well, you know what we call it around here? We call it crap fit. And that's what we do when we got so good as kids at fitting ourselves to crap. Now, I bet when you were at 7-Eleven stealing candy with your sister, I bet you guys were so good at looking like good little innocent girls. Right? And you were good little innocent girls. I mean, kids got to eat, right? You were good. But I bet you learned to start putting out an exterior version of yourself for other people to see while you get in there and was like stealing, candy. And having grown up kind of poor and neglected myself, I just know there's a lot of shame involved. It's a lot of shame. And a person can get a very strong need to sort of cover it up. And when you get so good at that, when you get so good at covering up your shame, that's crap fit. And if you don't heal that, see, that's a beautiful adaptation to cope with being a little kid and not having food. In your 40s, becoming dependent on somebody where you can't be yourself and pretending that there's like some sort of magic to the whole thing, that is the same thing. It's the same survival technique, only now it's not helping you survive, it's sabotaging your ability to survive. Like, this is a fragile situation. And for you, a wonderful next step in your life would be to heal from your trauma. And to heal from trauma, most of the time, we really need to be like in kind of a peaceful, safe space where we're not getting triggered all the time. So then you say, over the past year, we've established a very different platonic dynamic. And I'm just going to say, I think he's established a platonic dynamic or a platonic boundary. The dynamic sounds like it's still very much romantic. Though I still feel anxious at times and feelings resurface, mainly sadness associated with feeling unwanted, rejection, and being on my own. Oh, I mean, I know I don't need to tell you this, but you see the parallel of where you were as a child. And now...
Okay, we're going to take a break. I'm going to be back later after I get something to eat. And maybe set up some cameras to do a workout later. I do have an appointment at 5 o'clock. Not sure if they're going to want to be on camera or not. We shall see. In the meantime, yeah, gotta be safe. Mentally healthy. Keep your mental on fleek. Yeah, that word's ridiculous. Anyway, bye.